Okay, returning to assignment 1. It's good to every once in a while look back at your sketch and see if your arrangement of elements suits your original intentions. So does mine look like it's night yet? No, it doesn't, right? That's something I'm going to work on with some techniques I show you. Does it look stormy yet? Well, it definitely looks foggy, but stormy, I'm not so sure. Cold and wet, it kind of looks cold, but definitely not wet and not blustery cold. So chill, not iced. It doesn't have any ice. I don't need to worry about that. Does it look like it's not Earth? No, it looks pretty much like it's Earth. So I might need to deal with some elements in the sky and stuff to make it not feel like our existence. Does it have some city elements? Well, yes, it does. Does it have ruins? Yes, it does. Does it have forest? Yes, it does. Is it apocalyptical? It's getting there. It's getting there. So what's going to help? Well, the first thing we're going to do, now that we have most of our elements put in, keep my sketch over to the side there. So I have most of my elements arranged and placed, but there's some things not quite right, like this purple mountain here. That's going to get edited out, and I'll show you how. But I have everything that I'm using so far, like there's some weirdness here. Right? I have everything I'm using kind of all gathered into the middle now. So the first thing I can do is I can decide how to compose my full frame. And that's where I use these guides. So I'm going to use the Move tool, and remember I use these guides by dragging them down from the top or the bottom. And I'm actually going to give myself a little bit more space for the sky, because that's where the otherworldly components will come in. And I might give myself a little bit of space at the bottom here, kind of open it up so that I can do more with atmosphere and weather to make it look cold and like it's nighttime. So we'll work with that. Now that I've expanded it, I can go ahead and use the crop tool, which is under the magic wand. And if you're on default settings, which you should be, it will stick to our guides. So this does a huge favor for us in that it will cut our memory down quite a bit. And because we have so many layers and it's at high resolution, it's nice to save memory where we can, so these processes that we're going to be doing can go a little bit faster. The other thing we can do is we can get rid of elements we know we're not going to use. So I decided I'm not going to use this tree, so I just select that layer and delete it. I know I'm not going to use these smart elements anymore. If I need them, I can always get them from my original reference file. So anything with a smart layer icon in it, I can delete. And that will save a lot of memory. I don't really need this background copy layer over the top of everything, so I'm going to unlock it and delete that. So now I hit Save or Command S to update it, and now I see the challenges ahead of me. So how do I make this look like it's night and it's stormy and cold and wet, and still, how do I help these elements look like they go together better? Because this is exactly as these elements were, they're just cut out. So the first thing I'm going to do is squint at it and see what are the brightest kind of strongest elements coming forward, because that doesn't say night to me. And I say the house is like that, this driftwood in the foreground is like that. So let me start with the house, because it's got all this kind of sunlight hitting it in shadow. So this is how we adjust for color, and this is how we adjust for lighting, lights and darks. We go to Image. We select the layer we want to adjust, and I'm doing that with the Move tool with the Auto Select layer. So I just click on it, and it will select that house layer for me. Okay, but then I go to Image Adjust. Now these are called direct adjustments because they will change the pixels in that layer. And if you want to be more safe about it, this is what I recommend. Before you adjust, we're going to play with color balance and we're going to play with levels. Before you adjust, you might make a duplicate of the layer you're playing with. So we make a duplicate by hitting Command J. You don't have to, but if you're timid about it, and there's some advantages to it. So if I make a duplicate, now I have layer 1 and layer 1 copy. And if I'm really, really worried about my organization at this point, I might label them. So I can call this house, label the layer house, then make a duplicate of it, and I have house copy. Then I go to image adjustment, and the first adjustment I'm going to do is to color balance. How does something look like it's night instead of day? Well, instead of it having warm sunlight hitting it, its midtones are going to be shifted more towards the blue. See that? It's very subtle. You add more yellow, it looks like it's more in the day. You add more blue to the midtones, it's going to look more like it's bathed in moonlight. So I'm going to shift that. You don't want to do it too extreme. Notice that's so extreme it's even beyond my background ruins, which are already kind of purple. So instead I'm trying to make the house kind of fit a little bit more in with that. So maybe there. If I think it's going too magenta, I can push in some greens. And it's always good to play with these a little bit. I can push it more red, but that doesn't work. Or more cyan, and that's interesting, but I think it's pretty well balanced. It still has some interesting kind of red there. I can play with the shadows independent, of the rest. But basically the midtones is the safe place to start. So I'm only going to adjust midtones with the color balance to begin with. Okay, next is still, if I squint, there's still quite a few highlights on here. So the next adjustment I'm going to make to my copy is image adjustment levels. And these are the only two we're going to use. Everything at the top of adjustments, brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, that all has to do with lights and darks. Everything below that, from vibrance to color lookup, has to do with the color. So I use color balance, highly recommend it because it's not too extreme and you can really control the temperature of the color. And then I use levels because it's very understandable. So here again we have shadows, midtones, and highlights, but they're done with these kind of triangular sliders like we've seen in preview. And again, you're always safe playing with the midtones, but if you play with the shadows or the highlights, you can lose information. So if I want it to go darker, I'm going to shift the midtone slider to the right. Again, it makes a big difference. And notice it's like the sun is setting on that house. And it's getting darker and darker. So if I want it to be night, I go to the right. If I want it to be more in bright daylight to match the rest, like the driftwood's pretty bright, if I wanted it to match the driftwood as it is, I might go to the left. But I'm going to be bringing it all down a little bit. And then this is what's really nice. Because if you push the overall tones too dark, you start to lose a lot of information. So instead, if you just want to knock down the highlights, you have what are called the limiting sliders here. And you can say, I want to limit the whites from being bright white to being a little bit more subdued. So that's also very subtle, but it's going to be perfect for kind of showing a night stormy scene where I don't want the highlights on the house to be too strong. And yet, I don't want it to disappear completely when I put rain in and I put other elements. All right, so I did all those adjustments kind of quickly, and they seem like subtle adjustments as you're doing them. That's why it can be helpful to make a copy. If I just turn that off, you can see the change it made. And this is the other reason I like to do it as a copy, because we often overdo things. And if we overdo it, then we can just take the opacity of our copy and blend it in with the one underneath. And then I can get kind of anywhere between those two extremes when I'm adjusting everything. Okay, but let's leave it at 100% for now. And let's go to the driftwood in the foreground. And now I want to make the driftwood kind of match this in terms of its temperature and its lighting. But because it's coming into the foreground, it's still going to catch a little bit more light and maybe have a little bit more deep shadow underneath because it's reflecting whatever kind of celestial bodies I put into the night sky. So what do? Well, I'm going to start by labeling it and then making a duplicate, Command-J. Then going to Image Adjustments, Color Balance. I always recommend adjusting color before you adjust lights and darks because cool colors are in a darker range than warm colors. And then I'm going to push the midtones. Oh, there we go. More towards the blue. Helps already. Now it's a little bit more magenta than I want, so I'm going to push a little bit towards green and a little bit towards cyan, but not much. But look how much that, actually, not cyan. About there. Look how much that helps. And I didn't change the lights or darks at all. I just changed the temperature. But it helps everything kind of sit in one place. This is not the same as making everything black and white, right? This is just changing the temperature. Right now we're in a room with fluorescent lights. These are warm fluorescents, so it's very yellow-greenish light in this room. And how I would, if I took a photo in this room, if I want to adjust it to look more like believable color, if you were outside at night, this would be the same technique I'd use. Okay, next, I go to image adjustment and I'm going to play with the levels. And again, I can push the mid-tone slider a little bit to the right to deepen those shadows a bit. But I'm also going to limit the highlights just a little bit. So it looks like it's at night. Does that make sense? And you try not to overdo it, but if you ever do overdo it, if you make the copy, then you can just play with its opacity on the copy. Okay, next. Squeeze this a little bit more. I'm going to hit Command S after each of these selections because they make a big difference. So now I'm going to go back to this tree line here, which has this, let's see, no, that's from the ruins. So let's see the tree line. It makes a big difference. And I make a duplicate of that, the tree line copy. Now, when I make a copy of the tree line, notice what happened to my dust and debris. This is why we haven't done too many like low opacity duplicates. Because when you duplicate a low opacity, it's like putting different transparencies on top of each other. So they'll get heavier and heavier as you duplicate. So just be aware of that. And then I say image adjust, and I'm going to do color balance, and there's a lot of yellow, a lot of kind of really bright greens, and that doesn't look stormy or cold or wet or nighttime at all. So I'm really going to shift those midtones more towards the blue. It doesn't mean they're not green anymore. It's not like I get rid of all the green. But I will kind of take out some of the red and put a little bit of blue into it. And then in the highlights, I might also put a little bit of cyan and a little bit of the blue. So now these trees appear more like they're lit, and the mist, you'll notice, loses its warmth as well, the dust, because now it's lit at night. Now the lights and darks, now notice especially these little highlights that are tingling around my trees. I'm going to knock those down, and I'll show you how. So image, adjustment, levels. You can take the midtones, shift them a little bit darker, but not too dark, right? That's too much. And you don't want big pools of black anywhere either. And as you get into the background, you might start limiting not only the highlights, but also the shadows. So you see these really big focal points of black. If I limit the highlights, it will help with the little tinges of white, coming through the leaves. But if I also limit the shadows, it will kind of dull the darkness a little bit, which helps it not come forward too much, like it's receding in space behind more mist. So let's see if that made a big difference. Yes, indeed. Much more of a difference. And then instead of blending it, because of the difference in the dust and the difference in the color, I'm just going to turn off the layer behind. And I'm going to start, if there's any major things I need to delete, like there's these tree branches here that are just floating. So I'm going to take my big eraser at 100% soft edged, and I'm just going to knock those back. Right. And then I can kind of fine tune some edges later. Now the ruins behind that. World War II ruins. Of course, this is World War II on some alien planet. So call it anything